Hi, Tom. Another
Hi,
episode of 10 by 6. Well, the week's
hi
flown
Jake.
by.
It has. Another week has absolutely flown, and we're on episode 3 already.
Oh, I
Lovely to
know.
see you.
And you, mate, and you. Busy week?
Yeah, really busy. Yeah, but that's good. It's nice to be busy again, having had a period of time when I haven't been because of lockdowns and things. So yeah, good to be back and busy.
Need to clear these dark clouds away. I know that next week's supposed to be a lot nicer and brighter, but and the garden definitely needs, a good pour, but maybe not quite so much.
Yeah, don't forget no mow May.
No Monet, definitely no
No mow,
Monet. Yeah,
no
exactly.
maying, no mowing.
13 days in. Right, so number one this week, looking back over the ramifications, if you like, a little bit since last Thursday. But voting issues and the future of democracy. I know later on in the programme we're going to have a bit more of a detailed look at the election results around the country from last week. But yeah, and one of the things that sort of come out this week is the government are pushing the idea of voter ID, and they seem to be implying that it's the voters that are liars and corrupt. Perhaps to shift the attention away from themselves, do you think?
No doubt. I mean, there obviously been week after week after week of rampant corruption being exposed recently. So yeah, anything to deflect from that. But yeah, I mean, for those viewers that aren't aware, there was one conviction for voter fraud, voter identification fraud in the 2019 election. One conviction. This is a non-issue and a non-problem. But of course, the Conservatives, the government, are taking a leaf out of the American Republicans' book in terms of voter suppression measures to try and disenfranchise and stop the poorest people and black and ethnic minority people, particularly young people, from voting. And one of the measures they're looking to introduce is this photographic voter ID, like passport or driving license, which obviously it's estimated between 2 and 3.5 million people in this country don't have. They tend to be people in those sort of categories, and they tend to be people that are less likely to vote for the Conservatives.
And it's interesting that they cite Northern Ireland as a place where it's been successful, and obviously with the history of Northern Ireland, perhaps they consider that is a bit more of a priority to have this voter identification system. But as it's been pointed out since they pointed out that it's worked well in Northern Ireland, is that the voter turnout in Northern Ireland since has dropped quite significantly in some places. So the effect it's having is to obviously undermine and reduce democracy even further.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it's in places. It's one of, as I say, a number of voter suppression tactics used by the American right wing, the Republicans, and yeah, proven to be successful in stopping the poorer people, younger people, and black and ethnic minority people from voting, people that are less likely to vote Republican in America. So same here. And of course, it's not the only voter suppression tactic and assault on our democracy that the government are currently making. I mean, on top of certain things they've already done, they're now redrawing the electoral boundaries, gerrymandering, and there's a suggestion that could favour them by something like 30 to 35 seats, make those seats which currently they are not guaranteed to go to Conservatives more or less guaranteed. So there's gerrymandering. There's also the attack on the judiciary and the ability of the courts to undertake judicial reviews and to hold the government to account, basically. The Boris Johnson and the government have been very unhappy about the courts actually, holding them to account and pointing out where they're breaking the law, and they don't want that anymore. So they're taking a sledgehammer to the judiciary's ability to hold them to account. And of course, they've been filling up the Lords with Tory peers, adding 30, 40 peers at a time, Conservative peers. And then finally, of course, we've got the Police and Crime Bill, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill 2021, which has given rise to all the Kill the Bill demonstrations. And obviously, one of the many things that are concerning about that bill is the likely result of it would be an assault on our right to protest and demonstrate, including against government policies and actions. So altogether, when you put all those things together, it represents a fair old assault on our what's left, at least, of our democracy in this country.
And what tends to happen is that a lot of these ideas are floated by the establishment parties through their establishment friends in the billionaire corporate media to assess the public's response. And often there's never an intention that they will fulfill everything that they desire. But what they do, of course, is by allowing the public consciousness to be sort of enveloped by this extremist idea, understanding of what might occur as a result of the bill. They then come back and say, no, we have no intention of doing anything like that. So what they actually achieve is what they sought to achieve, but just by taking the extreme to really create fear within the consciousness. And that's sort of one tactic that's been used for a very long time. And of course, the other thing, going straight back to the voter ID, is the fact that one of the demographic groups that are going to be most affected, of course, are older people, the elderly. And when you look at who the older people and the elderly tend to vote for, it's much more likely to be Conservative. So interestingly, as a result of their policy, if it comes to fruition, it could actually hit the Conservatives more than many of the other political parties. So
I don't think it will. Go on, James.
So I was going to say, so I suspect that if that is the case, that it was never their intention. Again, it goes back to my first point, that they want to create the extreme, bring everything out into the open, and then bring it back to the line that they'd already drawn in the sand in the four walls.
Yeah, I mean, everything I know about voter ID and suppression from other places like America and what's already been deemed likely here through some studies is that it might affect some elderly people who tend to vote Conservative more, but the biggest groups it would, as I said, that it would affect would be young people, poorer people, black and ethnic minority people who tend not to vote Conservative. So I think overall there'll be it would be disenfranchising those people far more than any potential Conservative voters. Yeah. I'm fascinated by the first thing you said, though, Jason. I couldn't agree more. I think there's a thing that happens now in America and here. Of course, we tend to follow a lot of what happens in America, where the right-wing politicians, aided by the billionaire media, as you say, like to float extreme right ideas, and it serves a number of purposes. It shifts, as you say, it sort of shifts public consciousness further to the right. It shifts what's called the Overton window, which is the sort of range of policies that are considered reasonable at any given time in any society. And we've seen over many years now, at least more than the last 10 years, we've seen that Overton window shift to the right and the right again and the right again. We've said both of the main political parties have shifted to the right in the last 2-3 years, and public consciousness and discourse has shifted further to the right. So yes, the Conservatives throw out their ideas about we might be bringing back the death penalty and some really atrocious things about immigration. We might get asylum seekers and put them on Ascension Island or something. Really appalling, atrocious things. And even if they've no intention of doing it, or even if there's a bit of public backlash and they don't go ahead and do it, it has shifted the discourse and public consciousness once again to the right. And so they do this thing where they go, we're going to cut your legs off. And everyone goes, no, you can't do that. And they go, okay, we're going to cut your feet off. And everyone goes, thank God for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's a great place to finish, because it does reflect, unfortunately, and people call it cynicism, but it reflects the reality of the psychological processes that take place within society that manipulate our behavior and our thinking. And I'm guessing this is going to be a recurring theme within 10 by 6 as we move forward, because so much of what we do is reactionary. So much of what we do is responding to the cage that we're actually locked into. So that will affect, as I say, so many different things. But moving on to the next issue, as I say, it's a recurring issue, and it's just so mind-bendingly depressing, and that's the situation yet again in Israel. And of course, on the one hand, you have the UK and US establishments coming out being very pro-Israel, pro-Zionist in some respects. And I know you don't like that term, Tom, but it is a nomenclature that they adopt for themselves. So it's the establishments in these two countries, and then of course it's the other side. It's the Palestinian people trying to get their voice across. So yesterday I spoke to Chris Williamson, who's dedicated years, decades to visiting and understanding the nature of the situation that exists. And he's obviously very much pro-Palestinian in the fact that he sees them as an oppressed group, one that are constantly being violated, and with, as I say, dominant superpowers on the planet looking the other way. And in this interview, he relates it very closely to the apartheid situation in South Africa and how that eventually was overturned by a whole range of efforts, especially outside of South Africa. So it's a fascinating interview, and we'll see how the discussion evolves right now.
Yeah.
Hi, Chris Williamson. Welcome to 10 by 6. And for any of the viewers that are watching today, Chris was the Communities and Local Authority Shadow Minister between 2010 and 2013, and you were the MP for North Derby from
North.
2010 to 2015 and 2017 to 2019. Is that right?
Correct. That's right.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you. We're invited you on the show today, Chris, to talk about obviously the barbarity and the barbarism that's going on again in Israel. And there's just two things I really wanted to focus on, particularly. If you could just help us to understand the events that have led up to where we are today in Israel, in terms of the current situation. And then we'll move on just to look at maybe some of the solutions that you've considered for the people in that region.
Well, it's not a new phenomenon, of course, and I think we need to go back a lot further than the recent history, really right back to the Nakba, and indeed even before that, the catastrophe where Israel was created at the behest of Great Britain, and that led to 750,000 Palestinians being forcibly evicted from their homes. There's been land acquisition and evictions ever since, and Palestinians are treated as second-class citizens in Israel. The nation-state law, for example, privileges, as a matter of constitution, as a matter of law, privileges the rights of Jewish citizens over other citizens of the country. And Palestinians have seen the West Bank completely atomized. The notion of a two-state solution, I think, is a dead duck really now. It's not possible. Gaza is the world's biggest internment camp. I think it's the third most densely populated strip of land anywhere on Earth, and it's been regularly, as we know, subjected to bombardments by the Israelis, inevitably killing children and civilians. And obviously, recently, during a very holy month of Ramadan, we saw the Israeli security services going into that mosque and throwing in stun grenades, smoke grenades, and attacking people. And this was, I think, in relation to a march that some right-wing Israelis wanted to take part in, going through the Palestinian quarter. They did, in the end, reroute the march. And we saw some horrendous scenes where a lot of right-wing extremists jumping and dancing with joy on the street, as the compound of the mosque was on fire. You could see it in the background. It's just horrendous. And so, understandably, Palestinians feel incredibly aggrieved and badly treated. They've been ignored, I think, by the international community. Their rights have not been to the fore at all. Even the Oslo Accord, the so-called Oslo Accord, which led to the two-state solution, I mean, that's even not being honoured by Israel. I mean, land which is supposedly for the Palestinian people is being occupied and annexed by Israel on a daily basis. And of course, and this most recent thing is in relation to East Jerusalem, where I believe some Israeli courts have ruled that in favour of more settlements and so on, and that's understandably caused considerable upset and anger amongst the Palestinian community, and it should anger the entire world's community, because what they're talking about doing is forcibly removing people from their homes. It's like people coming to your door, the security forces coming to your door and saying, "You've got to get out. Somebody else is going to live here. We're going to knock it down. We're going to build something else." It's just unconscionable that this is going on in this day and age. And I've spoken to ANC veterans who lived through the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, and they tell me that the apartheid system in Israel is far worse than anything they ever endured. And things have obviously reached come to a head now, and the Palestinian people are seeking to fight back, and of course, and they have an absolute right to do that. They are an occupied people, and the additional protocol to the Geneva Convention gives the right in international law to occupied peoples to resist, including armed resistance. And yet the mainstream media, the corporate media, always focus on the response from the Palestinians, from the response from Hamas, and talk about as if it's sort of aggression from Hamas, rather than actually focusing on the real aggressors, which is the Israeli state, which is the world's fourth biggest army. It receives billions of pounds in aid from the United States. Is a client of the UK arms manufacturing industry, the military-industrial complex here. I think Britain, actually, over the last few years, has sold getting on for £500 million worth of armaments to Israel, and they are, fighting against, people. I mean, Gaza is completely sealed off. They have no airport. The water is controlled by the Israeli state. It's switched on and off at their will. Their energy is switched on and off at their will. I mean, it's a horrendous state of affairs. I mean, the Palestinian people have been incredibly restrained, actually, I think, in the circumstances. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to absolutely get behind the Palestinian cause and to call on our political leaders to stand up to this Israeli bulldozer, both metaphorically and in reality, because that's what they're doing. They're bulldozing people's homes. And the interesting conclusion, really, I suppose, the statement from our foreign secretary, the meaning of our statement was absolutely despicable. Again, focusing almost exclusively on Hamas and no criticism of the Israelis. This can't go on. And as I say, I think it's really incumbent on us to actually stand up and be counted. Their struggle, the Palestinian struggle, is our struggle, and we need to get behind them.
In terms of the thank you, Chris. In terms of the victory for the ANC eventually in South Africa, it's from external, from the outside world's perspective, it's like there were certain personalities, obviously Nelson Mandela, Bishop Tutu, and Steve Biko, and a number of others that the West sort of grabbed onto as personalities, and it helped the cause outside of South Africa. Do you think that the Palestinians possibly lack those types of personalities to really raise the imagination in the West?
Well, I think this is a mass struggle, as was the ANC struggle. And yes, it's quite handy sometimes to be able to pin your colours to a particular charismatic individual. But, the struggle in South Africa wasn't won by Nelson Mandela on his own. Obviously, he was a figurehead and he was a leader and an inspiration, of course, a great inspiration to me personally, actually, looking at his travails that he endured and came through it with great dignity. But in the end, it was a mass struggle. and that's what we see in Palestine now. And of course, then they did have a charismatic leader in Yasser Arafat in the past, But I think it's wrong to try and sort of personalize it and say, well, where's this kind of great leader going to come from? This is a mass struggle, and we need. I mean, there are people, of course, there who could come to the fore. I'm sure, but they don't get the attention. They don't get the publicity.
No.
There are people obviously who are leading the struggle. I mean, it's incumbent on the Western media to actually speak to them. But of course, it's very difficult. I mean, you've seen Abby Martin when she's been trying, for example, just one journalist trying to report from Palestine, and particularly from Gaza. Incredibly difficult to do so.
Yeah.
So there's real censorship going on. That's the problem. Of
course there is, absolutely. And moving on to the second sort of part of it, just briefly, what short-term solutions and a longer-term solution would you perceive to be the most favourable and sustainable option for the people?
The first thing I think is an arms embargo. Absolutely. I think holding Israel's feet to the fire in relation to abiding by international law, the UN resolutions, and to demand, I think, that the United States in particular stops actually providing aid to them, the billions of pounds worth of aid to this country. They need to be isolated. They need to be called out, and I think that's the way in which we can hopefully secure peaceful settlement. And I think ultimately what's required there, I mean, as I think I was saying at the beginning, two-state solution I don't think is a goer anymore, if it ever was. I think a one-state solution is, for me anyway, is what we should be seeking. A one-state secular state where there are equal rights for everybody.
Right. And that would mean a singular government?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, the Palestinians are second-class citizens. They can't even vote for the people that are responsible for over their lives. And I mean, it's so appalling. It's so difficult sometimes to find the words to describe the horrors of what is happening, and the fact that we are implicated. This nation is implicated. I mean, Britain that actually established the state of Israel in the first place and continues to endorse it and support it and arm it. And of course, the military-industrial complex makes huge profits out of the turmoil in the Middle East, and that's something else that we need to be calling out. But I think it's a mass struggle that's happening there, and we need to replicate that here and build a mass movement to not just support obviously the Palestinian struggle, but to actually press for our own liberation, as it were, from the difficulties and travails that many people are experiencing. Nothing like, of course, what the Palestinians are doing, but nevertheless, we do have major issues in this country with 14 million people living in poverty. It's just one example. And the way we're going to deal with that, I think, is through a mass struggle, a mass movement, relying on sort of representatives, elected representatives, as we've seen, is a lost cause. And we've got to do things for ourselves, I think, and force change to happen.
Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on 10 by 6. That was, again, you managed to surmise it so well in such a short space of time. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, thanks for inviting us on. Appreciate it.
Well, as you saw, Tom, that was a fascinating interview with Chris from yesterday. And as I say, he's a parliamentary campaigner. He's an ex-MP. He's an ex-shadow and community and local authorities minister under Ed Miliband. So he puts himself out there, and so many people, they simply don't. Unfortunately, they just toe a line, careerist line. But he puts himself out there, and he's like many people who do. He becomes, the impact of society, the impact of power is detrimental to his experience. So on to the next issue this week, and I'll say issue. It's actually an article that you wrote, Tom, called Nostalgia. Brilliant article in terms of your reminiscing of the days of the 1970s, and obviously you talk about how you're watching the sort of big match replayed on a Saturday morning, and the football that took place then, the footballers that existed, and the sort of the culture existed. And then you and I'll pass it over to you in a second, obviously, and then you bring it forward to the present day and your social media interaction, and how, I suppose, as a conclusion, not an awful lot has changed. Should we start by talking about the football, though, just for 2 minutes?
But I absolutely, I can always talk about football, and that would be a pleasure. But I posted the article on my social media with the sort of intro saying, this is not an article about football. This is actually about politics. Okay, there's a bit of football in there, but actually it's a commentary about modern political discourse, etc. So, but yeah, I mean, I grew up as a small child in the 70s, football mad. Watching and playing football constantly. Watched a lot of the big match back then, and now there's the big match revisited being shown on Saturdays, replays of those shows, and watching those old games and having waves of nostalgia flooding over me, watching those amazing players from that era where I grew up.
And there's old voices as well. And the old voices as well. Brian Moore, Martin Tyler in his very early days, Gerald Sinstad. You think, obviously Martin Tyler is now, numero uno at Sky Sports, and it's quite surreal, isn't it, looking back over it? And also I pick up as well, if you remember on Brian Moore, he used to have these certain commentary ticks. Did you ever notice? He'd always say, "What a good shot there! What a good goal there!" Do you know what I mean? And you pick up on it more, obviously, as you're older and you look back.
Absolutely, yeah, he did end sentences with "there" all the time.
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, I was watching it too.
Yeah,
it's funny. But yes, I mean, and I mentioned in the article, it's also kind of amusing as well as nostalgic to see some of the things from back in the 70s that are so different now in today's modern game. I mean, the pitches, for a start, mud baths or covered in sand, pitches covered in sand because of waterlogging and mud, just atrocious pitches that I think today's modern players probably couldn't perform very well on. And given how bad the pitches were, some of the players actually their touches was exceptional. Some goalkeepers not even wearing gloves, just bare hands. Of course, back passes that they can pick up, and certainly some agricultural tackling.
It's interesting because one of the theories put forward to why Liverpool was so successful, I should say, during the 1970s and 1980s, up until the point where the back pass rule was outlawed, if I can get my words out properly, outlawed, was the fact that some people calculated that between a third and a quarter of the game, the ball was in Ray Clemence's hands. So Dalglish or Rashford put them 1-0 up, and then Ray Clemence would see most of the ball.
Well, the keeper did used to be able to, hold on to the ball for a lot longer, and they'd pick up back passes, and then they'd bounce it or roll it, and then pick it up again, which nowadays they're not allowed to do, and things like that. So yeah, there was a lot of essentially wasted time. It wasn't officially time wasting then, but it was wasted time. And some I certainly think things like the back pass rule, where keepers can't pick it up with their hands, has been a good thing for the game.
Yes, very much so. Well, one thing I noticed,
wonderful to see some of those old wonderful skillful players, Tony Curry, Stan Bowles, my boyhood hero Trevor Francis, young Ray Wilkins, young Glenn Hoddle. I particularly love those midfielders. There was Vince Hilaire for Palace, and
it's funny because you say Vince.
So many fabulous players.
When you mentioned Vince Hilaire in the article, I'd forgotten all about him. Obviously playing for Crystal Palace. I mean, with Trevor Francis, I remember in 1978, Birmingham came down here to play a friendly with Weymouth, and Trevor Francis scored both the goals. And of course, like you also mentioned people like Laurie Cunningham, who tragically died in a car crash in the late 1980s. But he was on loan at United, and obviously he was huge at West Bromwich Albion in the late 1970s. But one thing I'm really interested to talk about, moving on, Tom, is the homophobia and the racism and the sexism that was on the terraces in the 1970s. Almost, I think you sort of imply it in some way. is it's now moved onto social media because it's been banned from the terraces. So people are still doing it. They just found somewhere else to do it.
Absolutely right, and that was really the point of my article. Apart from waxing lyrical and nostalgically about football of my youth, but it struck me that you know, as I say in the article, I spend too much time on political discussion groups on social media, particularly on Facebook, much against my better judgment. And there are, you know, there are a lot of people of all different political persuasions, but I find that there's a lot of people with right-wing views, most of which are sort of imported from America, again, from the alt-right and right-wing political commentators in America. And people seem to think it's fine on social media to say blatantly racist, sexist, homophobic things. It just struck me that a lot of the people I'm interacting with on social media are stuck in the 70s, you know, and they probably want to, they probably long for a time where they, you know, can speak race, you can say racist and sexist things with impunity and homophobic things with impunity, where they can, you know, watch Bernard Manning or Jim Davidson say deliver what was known as, you know, kind of racist comedy. It wasn't comedy; it was just racism, and they, you know, and mostly men as they are, they, you know, want their dinner on the table at 6 or expect that. So you know, that seems to be a lot of the sort of attitudes. I just think, wow, these people are kind of stuck in the 70s. And so, yeah, not as I said, nostalgia's not what it used to be. I mean, it's interesting, Jace, that, you know, some of those. It's fascinating how a lot of that political discussion on of right-wing supporters, conservative supporters in the UK on social media now is absolutely all from America. The points they're making, the arguments they're saying, the content that they're sharing. I mean, you know, they're sharing, you know, things from Turning Point, you know, this very right-wing American organisation that's infiltrated our universities now. They're sharing memes from America, speakers from America, alt-right and pro-Trump talkers. You know, people like Candace Owens from Turning Point, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro. You know, those are the kind of people that our people in the UK are sharing. They're all American right-wing pro-Trump supporters, and it just seems bizarre to me that they, you know, that they share those things. And also, there's a nastiness to a lot of it. One of the big things in America is that right-wing people love to what's known as own the libs. They want to own the liberals by putting them down, by supposedly exposing them, you know, their arguments. And so there's lots of content in America that's posted all about how we owned the libs today, and again that's been imported here. Somebody on a political discussion group the other day said that after the elections they were thirsty for lefty tears. They were thirsty for lefty tears. Like what on earth kind of language and political discourse is that? So yeah, and
it's
sadly,
almost poetic, isn't it? It's not something you even expect, unfortunately, from no disrespect, but it's, you know, from the right wing, who tend to be much more ad hominem and much more blunt. They don't really care about people's emotions and how people respond to what they say. But that is almost poetic.
Well, thirsty for lefty tears is kind of almost poetic, except that it's incredibly nasty, unpleasant.
Oh, of course it is.
In its
absolutely.
meaning.
Yes.
You know, in its meaning, it's pretty awful. And of course, what I've noticed a lot, and I know this is from my point of view, which is obviously a left-wing point of view, but a huge amount of the discussions which I've read or participated in tend to be where left-wing people, I believe, I find, tend to post more factual information, literally facts and truth, and people on the right completely ignore those facts and post propaganda and things that are not in any way factual, and they just ignore and dismiss the facts that you present them with, you know, such as facts about levels of poverty that exist in this country, levels of childhood poverty, facts about the national debt, which of course doubled under the Conservatives prior to the pandemic. etc. You know, you post things like that, and they just ignore it, say that you're posting things that are biased or whatever, and post some ridiculous propaganda in response. So, and on top of which, as I say, there's a lot of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. So yeah, I think a lot of people stuck in the 70s still.
Just to finish off before we move on to the next topic, do you think though that obviously nostalgia is very much in terms of somebody growing older and then looking back, and one of the things that often accuse people who spend a lot of time looking back is this idea of the sort of the rose-tinted glasses, that things were better back then. I think the point your article was effectively saying is that then and now are the same, but it's just portrayed, it's just allowed to come to the surface in different ways. So as I said before, the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, the misogyny, all of those things, absolutely integral to the 1970s. But people were screaming at black footballers, they were calling them puffs and all that sort of stuff, because they can't do it anymore on the terraces, or if they are, they're ejected from the stadiums or whatever. Now they're on social media, and I think, as we talked about last week with Facebook and Trump, it's time that the big tech companies did the same thing as the stewards. They eject them off social media. And of course, before we now move on to the next topic, we're still waiting for that, aren't we? We're still waiting for society to say, no, we're not accepting that anymore. And these people finding themselves in court, these people find themselves with lifetime bans, not just from the team that they support, but from any stadium. And maybe that's the way to use ID, not in terms of, but in terms of preventing people who genuinely just are a big boil of hate to be sidelined, and maybe help them, society step in and help them to understand why their anger and their aggression is undermining other people's life experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you're exactly right that those prejudices have remained, but people are aware that it's not deemed at all appropriate to be vocal at actually in public at football matches or wherever, although some people of course still are, but there's less of that than in the 70s, but it's moved online. And of course we've seen just in the last week, we've seen not just footballers and football clubs, but loads of different sporting athletes and organizations across the world taking a stand against racism and prejudice and coming off social media for a period of time. Some are doing it for a week, some are doing it for longer. Thierry Henry, I think, has said he's doing it forever now. He's not returning, and taking a stand. But I think there's the abuse, the levels of abuse that particularly black players receive is just appalling, and it staggers me that clubs, football association, football clubs, tech companies, and the police aren't able to deal with it. To me, it seems obvious. Somebody sends an abusive, racist tweet to a player or social media post to a player. Surely the police and the tech companies between them have the ability to identify who that person is that sent it, and you go and arrest them, charge them, have them in court, ban them from football forever, and see some of them go to prison. For inciting racial hatred or for electronic communications laws that they've broken, etc. Surely we're able to do that, and if the funding isn't there to free up police time to do that, then the big clubs need to chip in a couple of million each, get a fund together, employ some police or ex-police officers into a unit that sorts this out. And it staggers me that players are suffering with this. It's really awful.
Yeah, and I'm sure again, like many other things, we'll come back to this. Okay, something else that's happened yesterday, in fact, was the announcement by the government that they were going to recognise animal sentience and that as a result of that, they were going to be banning the movement of livestock to and from the UK. They're going to be banning a whole number of things that we perceive at the moment as being sort of palatable in terms of diet, shark fins, foie gras, just unbelievable, really. Hair coursing, of course, they're going to tighten up on. And you sort of read it initially and you think, okay, this is positive. And then I did an interview yesterday with a person from animal rights called Gil Ramirez. And I came away at the end of it actually much more aware and much more astute, if you like. Again, I probably should have been in the first place, that this is not an attempt to improve the lives of animals, subsequently as a result. It's much more to do with, again, us being manipulated. And actually, even though it looks good in headlines, when you look at the fine print, it's not really changing an awful lot. So here's my the interview I did yesterday with Gil Ramirez from Weymouth Animal Rights. Hi, Gil. Hi, Gil Ramirez. Welcome to 10 by 6. For the information of the viewers, Gil is a member of Weymouth Animal Rights, and he's here to talk about the proposed legislation that the Conservative government have announced today in relation to recognising animals as sentient beings, which for many is a long time coming. So what Gil is going to do is he's going to talk us through the legislation and what he perceives that will offer in terms of animal rights, and then we'll move on to the things that the government haven't mentioned and haven't identified, and maybe how they should progress into the future. So Gil, if you could just give us a summary of how you perceive the announcement today.
Okay, I mean, how I perceived the bill as it came through. I mean, on first reading, it's pretty it's around live exports and basically pets, domesticated animals, as in chipping of cats and the out of control dogs, on land. Dog fighting, poisoning, causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. To me, it is definitely designed, specifically designed around pets, our dogs and cats, apart from obviously the live exports, which has been a long time coming and long campaigned for. And basically, set out a legislation really around, extending sentencing for animal cruelty. And, it's basically about, the animals being sentient beings, really, that they have feelings and emotions. That I think, for me, that's the main thing that stands out in this legislation. Definitely.
Excellent. Yeah, cool. Thank you. I mean, one of the things they're looking to ban is like the import of ivory, import of shark fins. Obviously, it's about pummeling down on hair coursing as well, and other things as well in terms of foie gras, which obviously is something that's it's been a long time coming, because the idea of force feeding geese in order to make their liver enlarged and the agony that they must be in. I mean, people have been campaigning this since I was a child.
Yeah, I mean, it's decades.
And it's been
decades.
Yeah. And it's the cruelty.
Yeah.
And it's a luxury item as well, isn't it? It's not something that we need.
No. I mean, it's like, veal. Veal was another one that was campaigned against for decades and decades. And again, live export. I mean, people have died campaigning against live exports. You know, these are not new. Protests or campaigns, or these are not new points that for animal welfare. You know, these have been going on for decades. And again, it's something that I've been questioning with this whole legislation. That there's a part of me that almost feels like the Tory government have been forced into putting this in because of the Lisbon Treaty, the Article 13, and the withdrawal agreement, that with animals were already seen as sentient beings as part of the EU. And I think it wasn't actually included in the withdrawal agreement until now. I think there's a part of me that is a bit of a vote winner. It's a bit of a good thing to do as a vote thing. And I think there's a little bit of a forced hand as well as part of the withdrawal agreement anyway. When you look at the legislation, it's very fluffy. It's very vote winning because it doesn't actually include so many things. If we're going to say that, if the government is going to say that animals are sentient, it should include all animals, but it doesn't. It doesn't go far enough at all.
That was the thing that struck me, Gil. Once you recognise that the animals are sentient beings, in other words, they equate to humans, then surely animals have to be treated in exactly the same way as humans. And yet you look at it and you think, well, they're still going to be in the abattoir, they're still going to end up in the supermarkets, they're still going to be pumped full of goodness knows what, and they're not getting rid of the poultry cages.
No.
This. I mean, I'll pass it over to you because you know so much more obviously than I do. But what would you have, in the ideal world, what would you like to have seen this legislation? Forget it's introduced by Conservative government, so it's always going to be limited. But in an ideal world, what would you like to have seen?
Well, I'd like to have seen it include vivisection. I'd like to see it include proper animal welfare, and include not just just not things that don't make a profit like hair coursing or dog fighting, but this legislation is not based on any welfare that includes profit making. So the pharmaceuticals, hunting, it says about hair coursing, it doesn't say anything about beagle packs at all, that hunt hares. It seems to be everything that doesn't include profit making. If it includes a profit, if animal welfare involves profit, then it's not included in this bill at all. And that I think that's the obvious thing that is screaming out, is it's not hitting animal welfare where it should be as well. It's not going for animal welfare if it includes profits. Vivisection, pharmaceuticals. It doesn't say anything about vivisection at all. It says, I mean, one of the laughable things, a part of it that I first read was, carrying out non-exempted mutilation. Well, what does that mean? Non-exempted, carrying out a non-exempted mutilation. So there's exemptions. You can mutilate an animal if blah blah blah. It complies with this exemption. Well, the exemption is going to be if it makes a profit. You can mutilate an animal then if it's for your profit, basically. I mean, to me, carrying out a non-exempted mutilation, what even is that? Is that a sentient being or a non-sentient being we're talking about here? Do you know what I mean? It's a laughable piece of legislation, that. And it's very similar to the Hunting Act. Sounds good on paper, but it's full of exemptions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I get your point you mentioned earlier about being a vote winner, because you feel that, for example, the banning of bringing in trophy hunting and ivory into the country is probably a reflection of the way in which people respond on social media when they see a photograph of a trophy hunter, and the amount of anger and upset. So I can see where you're coming from in terms of being a sort of populist appeal to make the government look more humane and caring. But like you say, there seems to be so many holes in the legislation or the different bills that they're going to be putting in front of Parliament, and most people, you know, as you say, most people won't pick up on it.
No.
So not much will actually change.
No, no, not really. I mean, the legislation has already been in place in the EU anyway. So, I mean, basically, they've just pulled that out and turned it and twisted it and made exemptions, really. I mean, it's just full of exemptions in the sense that if it includes making money, if it includes profit, then really the whole thing doesn't mean anything. It doesn't include farm animals, for example. You know, it doesn't include working dogs, you know, as in hunting dogs. Do you know what I mean? You know, it's saying about, you know, involvement in animal fight, you know, and biting, causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. But that doesn't include fox hunting. You know, it doesn't include hunting, you know, shooting, you know. So are these animals not sentient in this legislation?
I know we were up at Abbotsbury Swannery on Sunday, and there was loads. Wasn't many people there at all, but there was lots of pheasants walking around. And you look at these beautiful birds, and then you think what they do to them in all the upper classes, in terms of rearing them, and then people going around making loud noises to get them out of the trees, and then people popping off guns left, right, and centre for goodness knows how long, and falling out of the sky. These beautiful creatures, just so they can have a bit of exhilaration, a bit of fun.
It's sport, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, is it sport though? That's the thing as well, is it? It's a psychopath sport for me.
Yeah, it's a blood sport. You know, they class it as a sport, you know, as a, you know, but it's not a sport. It's fattening up these animals so they can't fly anyway. So they're easy targets for the rich to have a bit of fun killing something. You know, at the end of the day, these animals are not classed as sentient beings in this legislation because they're not included. It's a pick and choose. If it means money, if it means profit, they're not included.
So thank you, Gail. So I think our general conclusion then from today's announcement is that neither of us are particularly impressed, but they have taken a step. They've just taken probably 99 steps less than they perhaps should have done.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is, with the legislation saying sentient, it is something we as an animal rights group can now work on.
Brilliant, fantastic. Yeah. That's a good, hopeful ending.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Gil, for coming on to 10 by 6. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.
So that was, you know, a fascinating interview with Gil. So I went in with hope, a little bit of hope at least, cynical hope, if you like. And I came out at the end of it, and it just reminds you that, you know, subterfuge that blinds us from the reality. And that ultimately, you know, it's one of the things we do on Dorset Eye is try to, you know, it's a page called Remove the Smokescreen, and it's constantly that battle to get through the mist and get through the fog, and try to find some reality that if we're in a democracy, we should expect it should be, you know, numero uno, but it's not, because we don't live in a democracy. We just get told that we live in a democracy. So when we're told that animals are going to get sentience and they're going to be treated comparable to human beings, it means so much more than just sending out a press release to the newspapers to print, and everybody's going, "Woo, what a lovely, caring government," when in fact it's the other end of the continent in reality.
I always say there's no democracy without truth, and you know, we're obviously through many years now through propaganda and other, you know, messages that come down from the powerful, that controlled by very wealthy, powerful people, that we're less and less being fed anything that resembles the truth. We're being fed a lot of lies and a lot of propaganda, and it's often hard to get at the truth. But well done for the interview and for finding out what's really behind the story. Yeah.
And it's why so many, Tom, are now turning to independent media and alternative media as their source. Okay, let's move on to issue topic number 5, and it's a sort of a look back at, as I say, as was mentioned earlier, the local elections of last week, and not just the local elections, you know, the elections in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland as well, but also, you know, in terms of the mayoral elections. And one of the things that you know, you can conclude from it is that there's absolutely no doubt that the current leader of the Labour Party is not fit for purpose. Because what we've noticed, and then you've noticed it too, and many other people have been talking about it, is that those that actually stood for something in terms of locality, in terms of a set of values and principles, did so much better in the election than those who were airy-fairy, driven by Westminster, chosen candidates who had little to do with the location in which they were standing. The Hartlepool, obviously, classic one. It just gives the impression that the Labour Party now aren't really that much different to the Conservative Party, which means that when you come to choose the 2 brands on the shelf, if you're already buying one brand, there's no incentive to buy a brand that tastes virtually the same. The only reason you switch from buying one brand to another brand is because you don't particularly like the brand you're currently consuming, or you've gone off it for various reasons. You know, your taste buds have changed, or whatever, or the price has been elevated to a point where you can't afford it anymore, or whatever. So what you're being offered with Keir Starmer's Labour, from what I perceive, is, why would the consumer change? Because what are they changing to? Because the new brand of coffee is almost like it's got no label on. You don't know what you're getting. You just know it looks brown, and same as the other coffee that you consume. But that's all it is. It's, you know, they had no policies outwardly. They were doing these gimmicky, you know, photo opportunities, stood in a wallpaper shop. Keir Starmer, you've got a shadow cabinet that virtually nobody knows who is in it because they're just bland. Yeah, so from the point of view of looking back at last week's results and trying to ascertain where the Labour Party go from here, it's a radical overhaul as far as I can see. And not that I didn't vote Labour, but it's a radical overhaul that they require.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I was just thinking of a slight analogy with what you were saying there, that, you know, if we say that the Conservative government is offering Marmite, or is Marmite, love it or hate it, I guess. Under Corbyn, Labour were offering jam, homemade jam, made by Corbyn from fruits grown on his allotment, but something completely different. And now, you know, Corbyn and jam have been shunted to one side, and Keir Starmer's offering Vegemite. You know, a slightly different version of Marmite, essentially. Yeah, that's not great at all. You know, it's not offering the voters' choice. And of course, we're talking about a time when we desperately need a viable alternative to a Conservative government that are, you know, rampantly corrupt and have dealt with the pandemic, obviously, atrociously, with one of the worst death tolls in the world, one of the worst death rates in the world, and the slowest economic recovery from the pandemic of all the G7 countries, and also trying to, as we discussed earlier, doing things to destroy our democracy even further. So we desperately, you know, and the growing inequalities, growing number of people living in poverty, children in poverty, continued cuts to services and austerity. So we desperately need a viable alternative, and Starmer isn't offering one currently. I posed the question last week before the election: what is he offering and to whom? And it's really not clear. You know, there's not a clear, consistent message that is different from the Conservatives. He's lurched the Labour Party to the right, and as you say, all over the country, it was mostly left-wing, socialist Labour candidates that were successful. They got elected or re-elected. Same in Wales, of course, where you know, the Welsh leader and Welsh Labour Party is more left wing than it is in.
Well, Mark Drakeford,
Yeah.
even he admitted himself he did much better than he was expecting, given the current climate.
Yeah.
You know, and Wales now has become a safe place for Labour voters.
Yeah.
Even though the Conservatives, I think, got 13 seats. You know, Mark Drakeford's Labour way out in front of everybody else. So if you've got those sort of more egalitarian, equitable values, at the moment it seems to me that if you are prepared to move, then Wales is the place to go to.
Yeah, absolutely. And conversely, all over the country, the more centrist or right-wing candidates of the Labour Party lost seats or weren't elected or re-elected, and that includes people where Starmer's been doing this awful thing where constituency Labour parties have elected a candidate, and he's overruled them, thrown out that candidate, and parachuted his own centrist person in there,
Yes.
who's then failed dismally.
I don't know if you've also
elected. And despite
I don't know if you've also noticed, Tom, sorry, just to butt you in there. I don't know if you've also noticed that what governments tend to do is they tend to blame the opposition party. So, for example, the Conservatives are still, where they can, they're still blaming Labour for the fact that they haven't been in office since 2010. They're still blaming Labour in 2021. What the Labour Party are doing, they're not blaming the Conservatives, they're blaming the previous Labour leader for everything. Even though he got more votes than any other Labour leader this century, apart from Tony Blair in 2001. It looks like a conspiracy within the Labour Party. For a lot of people on the outside, it looks like this isn't a case of incompetence. This is a case of a proper full-blown conspiracy to shift Labour back to the right.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah, undoubtedly. And obviously, Starmer's response to to this very clear message that left-wing Labour candidates in the main did well and right-wing Labour candidates in the main did badly, his response is to say we're still suffering with the left-wing era of Corbyn and we need to move further to the right. There's always been this argument for many, many years now that Labour has to shift to the right to get elected. Otherwise, it'll perpetually be a party of opposition.
Yeah.
And it has indeed spent a large amount of its existence in opposition, far more than in government, in power. And it's almost an accepted view that Labour has to shift to the right because Tony Blair did, and because he courted Murdoch, and the Sun supported him, and they got elected. I don't think now the facts prove that to be true. Certainly in these local elections, the facts prove otherwise, as we just discussed. So there's a considerable chance that far from making Labour more electable by shifting them to the right, Starmer's actually alienating traditional left-wing Labour voters, that meaning they'll vote for someone else or just apathetically not show up at the polling station. And he may be making, sending Labour into political oblivion.
Well, two things come from that for me. Firstly, the rise of the Green Party candidates. They got so many more candidates in last week's elections because for those people on the left, they're looking around to see who they can vote for now, apart from the right-wing Keir Starmer Labour Party, and they've gone for Green. And of course, the other thing as well, the point you made about the local elections being sort of symbolic of voters not wanting right-wing Labour candidates. But if you look at the 2017 election under first past the post, Jeremy Corbyn only missed out on becoming Prime Minister by literally hundreds of votes, because the constituencies polling or voting showed that many candidates were so close together that if 10 this way and 20 that way or whatever, would have given him the opportunity to have formed a government. So that was people call it a radical manifesto. It's no more radical than most Scandinavian countries get every election. It's just that the way in which it was painted by the right-wing billionaire corporate media and right-wing voices was to suggest that it was this Stalinist, Leninist project. Nothing of the sort. That's a drivel. But of course, if you're constantly fed drivel, you only know what you know.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you're right. It goes back to the Overton window that we talked about earlier. The Overton window's shifted again and again and again to the right, so that now actually very reasonable populist or popular policies that were in the Labour manifesto, and objectively, when people were shown those policies without knowing which party they were from, Labour's manifesto was massively more popular than any of the other main parties. But you know, we're told repeatedly that that they were, you know, crazy, loony left, socialist, verging on communist policies. But as you say, that those policies that were presented in the Labour manifesto, as well as being objectively popular in this country, are seen as very, very normal countries, policies in so many countries, including European countries, Scandinavian countries. Of course, New Zealand's doing exceptionally well with their Labour leader, Jacinda Ardern, not only with the pandemic, where they've had 26 deaths, we've had verging on 150,000, but a lot of other issues as well. They're doing very well with economically and otherwise. So yeah, it's a desperate situation. I don't know what the future is for Labour, but I believe under Starmer it will continue to be pushed further to the right. Traditional Labour voters and people that are active within the Labour Party have been persecuted and attacked. Large numbers of people have been ejected, had their memberships, cancelled from the Labour Party, including black and ethnic minority people and Jewish people, because they're socialists. And some of that is unforgivable for us on the left, for people like myself on the left. It's pretty unforgivable what Starmer's done. And of course, the other thing is this extraordinary revelation that a considerable number of people within the Labour Party at Labour Central Office, when Corbyn was leader, were actively working to undermine the Labour Party and prevent them from winning the elections in 2017, 2019.
Well, we've got on
and the Ford report, can I just say, the Ford report, which explores that, we've all been waiting for Labour to publish that Ford report for, well over a year. And I think Starmer's decided to bury it because he doesn't want the general public to know that essentially his mates, the Blairites, the right wing of the Labour Party, were actively working to undermine their chances of winning elections under Corbyn.
But I was about to say as well that we've got a 6-part unredacted analysis that was leaked last May, so a year ago, of who's responsible, what was going on, etc. It's absolutely certain that the Ford report, even when it does come out, will be redacted. And for some major event we know will occur within 24 hours to shift everybody's attention away, because that's how it works in the billionaire corporate media. So, please, viewers, if you really want to know what went on, go to Dorset Eye and look at the leak report analysis over 6 articles. It's horrifying. It's terrifying. It's terrifying that a Labour Party that was supposed in its genesis to represent the working classes and to help level up more, bring up those people in terms of opportunities, income, etc. It makes horrible reading. Anyway, got there. Time's up. Final. It's a local issue. Local issue. You're going to introduce this, Tom. Local Weymouth, great big area called Radipole Park, and what they've been doing to hopefully make nature and bees, etc., more sustainable.
Absolutely. Well, so we're really lucky this week in that we have not 1, not 2, but 3 interviews with people with a lot of knowledge and expertise who actually know what they're talking about, Jace.
What are you saying there, Tom?
Aren't we lucky? And yes, so we're very fortunate and with our interviews this week. And I was really delighted earlier today to talk to Rosie Osborne, who's from Weymouth Town Council and has been really involved along with other people in the development of Radipole Gardens. And it's there's some really exciting things going on there. It's a wonderful place. And so I'll let Rosie tell you all what's happening.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it.
Right, hi everyone, and I'm here with Rosie Osborne. Delighted to welcome you, Rosie. Rosie's the Projects and Activities Officer with Weymouth Town Council, and she's here to have a chat with us about developments at Radipole Gardens in Weymouth. So welcome to Dorset I-10x6, Rosie.
Thank you, Tom. Nice
Lovely
to be here.
see you. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. And could we just start by, could you tell us a little bit about your role and the other people who are involved with Radipole Gardens?
Yeah, sure. So I'm, as you say, the Project and Activities Officer for Weymouth Town Council. My role in this particular project is just to create some of the documentation that went into the Stage 2 lottery bid. So this included an activity programme, volunteer and training programme, and a consultation report. So that was basically talking to the public and finding out exactly what it is that they value about Radipole Park and maybe some of the changes that they'd like to see. I was supported by a project manager, Crystal Johnson, Jane Biscombe, project lead, Mike Goulden, chair of the Friends of Radipole Park and Gardens, and Sue Hogburn, who's the secretary of the Friends group. They're a fantastic project team. Each person sort of had their own expertise, which they brought to the role, which was really brilliant. So, for example, we have Mike Goulden, who's got a catering experience, so he wrote the business plan for the cafe. We've got Sue Hogburn, who's a historian, that's her passion, so she was great in doing all the sort of historic heritage research, which went into our conservation plan. So then we've got Crystal, who's got loads of experience doing lottery projects, so she was brilliant at just getting us through that Stage 2 submission. And we also work really closely with the parks team. So that's in particular the gardeners Rob and the apprentice Dom, who are fantastic and do a great job of keeping the park and gardens looking nice and tidy. They get lots of compliments for that. So yeah, very lucky. We've got a great project team.
Great, and lovely to hear that lots of different local people are involved. Could you just, for people that don't know, could you just tell us exactly where Radipole Gardens is in Weymouth, please?
Yeah, sure. So it's located on Radipole Park Drive, which is opposite the RSPB Nature Reserve. It's right in the centre of Weymouth. The park's quite unusual in that it stretches for almost a mile in length, and it's quite sort of thin in places. So it's quite a long, thin park. But yeah, people call it the green lung of the town centre, and the gardens in particular are beautiful. So I think people find it a bit of a nice sort of peaceful haven in an otherwise quite busy urban area. So yeah, very much valued.
Fantastic. And could you tell us a bit about what the current projects are that are underway at the gardens, and any plans for the future development of the gardens?
Yeah, so we were awarded 1.4 million in total from the National Lottery Heritage and Community Fund. As part of the bid, the lottery expected to carry out extensive consultation. So this is, engaging with the public, finding out, what they might feel, what items or resources or facilities they feel might be lacking. The majority of people said that they love Radipole Park and Gardens, however, felt that their time was limited due to the lack of facilities such as toilets and a cafe. So this has actually put some people off, who might have small children. As we know, children can only last so long before needing a drink or a trip to the loo. So this sort of puts some families off being able to spend much time there. And also groups, preschools, nursery schools, primary schools, they all have that same issue as well. And some of the community groups and nursing homes as well, said there's nowhere to shelter or to have a cup of tea if it starts to rain. So this is going to be our biggest addition to the park. So it'll be a brand new heritage cafe and toilets, and they'll be located next to the upgraded play area. So this is another exciting part of the project, which we aim to upgrade the play area and make it a bit more exciting for older children. Some of the feedback we got was that there's not enough sort of challenging items of play equipment. So we're going to introduce those and have some items for children with disabilities. So some that are wheelchair friendly, and also have sort of sensory feel to them, such as water play. That's going to be a new addition to the play area. So that's quite exciting. And we're also going to resurface the car park, which will be really good because at the moment, groups that have minibuses or coaches can't come in and park. There's no designated disabled parking. So we want to resurface it and put some of these disabled bays in so that groups or families that may have disabled members of their family can come and visit. We're going to upgrade the sports courts. We're going to introduce table tennis. That's a big hit at some of the other parks in Dorset, so we wanted to introduce it at Radipole as well. The Friends group are creating a sensory garden. So that's sort of a mini project that they've done themselves and fundraised themselves for. But it's going to be built at the same time as the rest of the construction work. And that's going to go adjacent to the cafe. So it's just going to be a really nice, peaceful garden for people to come and relax and sort of feel safe. And it's going to have things like lavender growing and lots of planting that you can smell and feel, and really hoping that it's going to open up some volunteer opportunities as well. So it's going to be sort of community led, and we're hoping that some groups can come in and maintain some of the flower beds in the new sensory garden. So that's very exciting.
Amazing. Wow, that's such a lot. I mean, that's I had no idea that all that was going on and planned for the future, and fabulous to hear how inclusive all of that is. You know, things for the elderly, things for teenagers, things for little ones, things for parents, things for people with disabilities. Just fabulous to hear, you know, how inclusive all of that is, and great. So last thing I just wanted to ask you really and discuss with you was about what you and other people see as the main benefits of the developments that are happening now and planned for the future. I'm thinking sort of benefits for the community, benefits maybe for the environment.
Yeah, so our main aim of the project is to connect people with nature, and sort of celebrate wildlife, and above all just sort of encourage people to use the park and gardens. I think the main benefits to people will be to sort of boost mental health. I think lockdown particularly has showed us how important green spaces are to people. I know a lot of people, you know, their daily exercise in their local park was a real lifeline for them. I think, you know, the simple act of saying hello to someone whilst you're out on your walk can really make a difference to some people. So we want to sort of incorporate all these things into the project and sort of combat social isolation. So we've got loads of activities with this in mind, where we're trying to get people, you know, to come along and meet somebody else through volunteer opportunities and some of the activities. We want the cafe to act as a social hub for groups to meet. So this might be, you know, the health walk group after their walk, or some parents after the school run, or, you know, maybe just somebody popping into the cafe and seeing a friendly face. And, you know, we're really hoping it's going to sort of, we know that loneliness is a really big issue in Weymouth, and we really want to provide a space for people to come and meet other people. So we're hoping that that's going to be behind the driving force behind our project. So in terms of the other thing you asked me about was environment. We hope to encourage more wildlife. So our bat report that was carried out by Dorset Wildlife Trust came back to say that there's actually several species of bat living in the gardens. So we have an amazing volunteer busy making bat boxes for the bats to live in. So that's really nice. There's also hedgehogs living on the embankment of the playing field, and plenty of birds obviously coming over from the RSPB Nature Reserve. So the park supervisor, Emily, suggested we actually leave areas of grass to grow so that bees can pollinate from some of the dandelions and buttercups and things that are there. And we also want to extend the wildflower area near the community orchard. So there's a community orchard that has lots of, you know, apple trees and damson trees and things like that, which are great for wildlife. But there's also a wildflower area, which has been a really big hit, and people always comment on how beautiful it looks. So we just want to extend that because that's really good for butterflies and bees. So yeah, we're hoping the project will improve biodiversity in the park as well.
how fantastic. I mean, huge benefits that you've outlined there for the community. People may be suffering after the last year or so of lockdowns and social isolation. Huge benefits for the environment. So absolutely fantastic. It's, you know, a real pleasure to hear about all this going on in Weymouth. And if anybody, obviously, just want to encourage everyone to get yourself down to Rowdy Pole Gardens just to enjoy the place. It's truly fabulous and obviously being developed in loads of very exciting ways. If anyone's interested in getting more actively involved with the Friends of Rowdy Pole Gardens or volunteering opportunities, presumably, can they contact you at Weymouth Town Council, Rosie?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got the Weymouth Town Council website, obviously with the Rowdy Pole Park page on there, so all the details are on there. And also soon, which is really exciting, the Friends group are launching a brand new website, so that'll obviously have all the details on there as well. So as soon as the new website's up and running, we'll be launching that. So yeah, watch this space.
Wonderful. Well, Rosie, thank you ever so much for taking the time to join us and tell everyone about the exciting developments at Rowdy Pole Gardens here in Weymouth. Thank you so much. Take care.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Well, that was excellent, Tom.
It was terrific, wasn't it? And well done to Rosie and people at the Town Council and obviously the Friends of Rowdy Pole Gardens. Some exciting things going on there. And if you're in Weymouth, get yourself down there. If you're out of Weymouth, come to Weymouth and enjoy the gardens and other things. So yeah, really fab. Well, that's it for this week, Jace. That's it. I really enjoyed our discussion.
Flown by again, isn't it? Flown by.
It has.
Yeah.
Well,
sorry, Tate, you go.
I was going to say, have a lovely week. Look forward to seeing you next week. And you've got a little treat at the end for us, have you?
Yeah, another little funny. We're trying to find a little funny to finish off the show, a bit more lighthearted. But anyway, you have a great week, and I'll see you next Thursday.
Thank you, mate. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
I was listening to my son do his math homework at the kitchen table, and then all of a sudden he said, 3 plus 6, the son of a bitch is 9. And then he said, 2 plus 5, the son of a bitch is 7. I said, what are you saying? What are you saying? He said, my teacher, she showed us how to do math. And that's what she said. I said, just to make sure I was right, I said, okay, go on. He said, 2 plus 2, the son of a bitch is 4. I said, okay. So I left the room and I called the teacher. I said, hello, are you teaching our children math saying 2 plus 2 and the son of a bitch is 4? It got real quiet. Then she started laughing. She said, ma'am, what I said was 2 plus 2, the sum of which is 4. I got to bake that lady a cake. Maybe buy her some apples.